Hello and welcome back to The View from 22, where we are going to be taking a last look at the Ashes, because as I'm sure many of you know, England won the last test at the Oval yesterday, squaring the series at 2-2. Australia do, however, retain the urn. They keep the Ashes, and England will have to try and win it back in Australia, which will be a very tall order in 2 years' time. I'm joined for the last time by Henry Blofeld, who has so kindly provided so much brilliant commentary. Henry, thank you very much for coming back.
My dear, I think it's awfully sad, isn't it? It's the last time. It's been an extraordinary summer's cricket. I mean, I don't think I've watched something like 700 or 800 test matches, and I don't think I've ever sat through a series as exciting, as pulsating as this one. Possibly one in the West Indies in 1967-68, very long time ago.
Well, I was going to ask you, was the 2005 series, did you find it more exciting than the 2005 series, which was pretty special?
Well, I suppose it's easy to say yes, because it's more immediate and the memories are more immediate. Yeah, I think so, in a way. The first test match in that series, England were bowled over by Ben McGrath, weren't they? And that was not a very exciting test match. I think generally, this series had it. I mean, you never knew session by session what was going to happen. You could not predict at all. I think the only thing that I got right in the end was when Australia were 135 for 1 yesterday morning. I did say I'm quite certain it's going to be a couple of wickets or a dozen runs, because it's that sort of series. And the funny thing is that once a series starts in that way, it goes on.
Yes. Well, it's not the only thing you got right, Henry, because you also said before the test at Old Trafford, which was sadly rained off or rained into a draw, you did say that the English weather would stop us winning the series 3-2 when we were 2-0 down. So you were bang on the money there.
Well, I mean, you could say at the age of almost 84, it comes from experience. I don't know that there's any great expertise, but it did seem to me unlikely that we'd get through the whole summer without any interference. But of course, I mean, England really, I think, would have won that test, and it would have been 3-2, which was extraordinary. The only 3-2 series ever was back in 36-7, when Gubby Allen's side won the first two tests and lost the last three. That was in Australia. I feel that a draw was probably the fair result, even in spite of the rain at Old Trafford, because England absolutely threw away the first test match. They dropped those catches. Johnny Bairstow, I don't know. I know he did well or did better with the gloves increasingly. Whether it was a wise choice at the start, I'm not sure. And then, of course, at Lord's, 180 for 1, England were on the second day with Nathan Lyon, the off-spinner, out of the series with that calf muscle. England should have got 600, instead of which they gave long leg catching practice.
Yes. Actually, Nathan Lyon's injury, when you look back over the series, could have been very, very important, was maybe a little overlooked as to how much that limited the Australians.
One can go as far as to say, would Australia have won the series if Lyon had been there? He's such a good cricketer that wouldn't have been an impossibility. Not only was he a wonderful bowler, and is a wonderful bowler, he's also a pretty useful batsman, as we saw in the closing stages of the first test, when he and the Australian captains Cummins put on all those runs at the end. And actually, although he looks a very unathletic figure, he's pretty handy in the field as well. So, I mean, I think his loss was huge for Australia.
Shall we talk about the story of the day, it seems, and that's Stewart Broad, who, of course, announced his retirement the night before the last day of the test. And then it was almost written in the stars that it would happen. He took the last two wickets and also hit his last ball in Test cricket for 6. He does seem to have a certain magic that I think puts him into the realms of greatness, cricketing greatness. Do you think we can say that?
I think this is probably true. It's so difficult, isn't it, to compare great fast bowlers now with what's gone by in the past. I think one could say, looking at the downside of Broad, that perhaps he was a little bit inconsistent. There were the times in Australia, particularly when he went for an awful lot of runs and really didn't feature much in the wickets. But overall, anyone who takes 600 Test wickets, I mean, it's absolutely amazing. And he is touched with magic. I mean, to get hit your last ball you face in an Ashes Test for 6 and take a wicket with your last ball the next day is absolutely extraordinary. And all hail to him. I mean, tremendous. He's such a thoroughly decent bloke. And I mean, he's not in the image of old-fashioned fast bowlers who were always thought to be a bit basic, weren't they? To say the least. I mean, Broad was absolutely magnificent, I thought, and all credit to him. I did have one slightly sad moment yesterday, actually. I don't know if you agree with this, Freddy, but when all this was going on and Broad took the wickets, poor old Jimmy Anderson, at the age of 41, a bit too old, probably, he couldn't get it. He couldn't handle it. He couldn't, and the greatest swing bowler ever. But I'm afraid he'd been neutered, hadn't he? He simply couldn't find it. And I did think while Broad was getting all the applause at the end, I thought, poor old Jimmy, he shuffled off it into the England dressing room and probably in a corner on his own.
I had slightly the same thought, actually. I thought, in a way, it's the most cruel thing on Anderson because Broad has chosen to go out on an amazing high. Jimmy now may not have the choice as to whether he goes out on an amazing high or not, because on current form, you probably have to drop him from the Test team.
Oh, I think you certainly do, I'm afraid. Yeah. I mean, there may be an excuse next year if the wickets, the weather turns and it's absolutely ideal. And there's a match at Old Trafford. You never know. There are circumstances when you could see him coming back. And it would be lovely to think that he's going to take 5 wickets on his final thing. But at the moment, it really does look as though his day is done. And what I kept wondering was he rather regretting that he hadn't made a similar decision to Broad's a little bit earlier?
Yes. Although he did quite graciously, he was one of the first to actually congratulate Broad, wasn't he?
Oh, yes. He's a great man. Jimmy wouldn't let that worry him. I mean, he'd get it absolutely right in that way, and on full marks to him. But I mean, it was an extraordinary day. We concentrate obviously on Broad, but one of the features of yesterday was the terrific slip catching of Zach Crawley. Yes. And he had an amazing series in that drawn test, the rained off test at Old Trafford. That 189 was one of the great Ashes innings. And he has shown latterly more consistency than before. His 73 here was very good at the Oval. And I think he's become a wonderful cricketer. And I think this is the great strength, one of the manifestations of the great combined strengths of Stokes and McCullum, captain and manager. They've stuck by Crawley. They perceived him to be a match winner. They perceived exactly what he has produced, and not every management team can do that. And I think that was terrific, and all credit to them, and to some extent with Duckett too. Duckett didn't have quite the same sort of series, but those 2 marvellous innings he played at Lord's, and he made a number of very invaluable 40s, making sure that Australia were looking at 70 or 80 for no wicket, which is always rather depressing for bowlers.
Yes, well, and they seem to have finally cracked the riddle of the opening pair for England now. I think the BBC...
Well, I know. It's amazing, isn't it? After all the years we've gone by, Alistair Cook could never find a partner, and before that, it was, what can we do about the opening position? And so often sort of chaps who wouldn't fit in the middle order, in order to keep them in the side, they were pushed in at number 2, something that never works. And I agree. I think it's marvellous. And I hope those 2 will go on now for a year or 2.
I'm looking ahead, as is my wont. I know it's a long way away, but I can't help thinking, having been slightly robbed, I think we could say, in this series. Maybe that's a bit.
No, I think that's a perfectly reasonable thing. I'm just saying that, I don't know. You can argue it the other way and say that if we'd hung on to the catches at Edgbaston, we wouldn't be having this conversation because the Ashes would be safely in our keeping.
Yes, but do you think perhaps we might manage to rob the Australians in a year and 3/4, a year and a half's time?
It's very, very difficult to win in Australia, you know. I wonder, I tell you what I was thinking, not yesterday, but at Manchester when watching Crawley's innings 189. How's he going to cope with the higher bounce on Australian pitches? How's Duckett going to cope? It's interesting. Some people come through that test wonderfully well. Other very good England batsmen, all down the ages, have gone to Australia with great records and have come back empty-handed, entirely empty-handed, almost having played their last test match. I mean, there have been significant failures because the high bounce, the steep bounce, does undo techniques that have been honed only in England without any thoughts to other behaviour of the ball, that is.
Explain that a little bit more for us, Henry. Is that because a batsman like Crawley likes to hit the ball on the up? And therefore
he likes to hit it on the up. When the ball bounces, it comes through probably a little bit quicker. And when it's bouncing that a bit much higher, you've got to play later, I think. And I'm quite sure he's got the ability. Will he adapt to it? I can't answer that, and I won't be able to until I see him in Australia. But this higher bounce has undone some very good England players in the past.
Do you think it might also undo another brilliantly talented attacking batsman in Harry Brook?
I think Harry Brook is less likely to be undone by high bounce than he is by his own character. I'm not certain Harry Brook at the moment isn't thinking it all a little bit too easy. He's good. I'm not certain that he's that good. No, I mean, no, that's wrong. He's very good, but I'm not quite certain he's as good as he thinks he is. I mean, you saw him come in at the Oval, and he about his fourth ball, he advanced down the wicket and hit Murphy for a straight six. It was a supremely confident shot for a batsman who's been around for a long time, for a chap who's really new to Test cricket. It was amazing. And then he played a very wet shot outside the off stump in the next over but one, and was caught behind. I think he's got a little bit to go. He's got to quieten himself down and realize that the game perhaps isn't quite as easy as he thinks it is at the moment. I mean, he had that amazing start, didn't he, in Pakistan and then New Zealand last winter. And Australia are a different kettle of fish, and he'll understand that too. But he's got such talent. My money would be on the fact that he will make it work for him. And I would back him, being an intelligent chap, which he obviously is. I would back him to cope with the high bounce in Australia.
And what about our bowling attack in Australia? Obviously, we'll be without Broad. We'll almost certainly be without Jimmy Anderson. We have some useful quick bowlers now. We have Wood, we have Tongue, we have Robinson.
You haven't mentioned the best one, Wokes.
Wokes
took 19 wickets in 3 Test matches. I thought looked absolutely wonderful. I think his bowling's got some way to go too. I mean, I think he's a really exciting prospect. Wood. The trouble with Wood is when he's on song, when he played in that first test at Headingley, he was terrific. He's always been injury prone, and he had a bruised heel in this. I know that sounds a sort of trivial injury, but if you're a fast bowler, it jolly well isn't. He does get injured, and I wonder quite where that's going to leave him as far as the future is concerned. Yes, Tongue was a great prospect, wasn't he, when he came in for that match? And he bowled jolly well. And he's obviously, I would think he's going to go on tour. And next year in England, we'll see much more of him because there's now, with Broad going and Anderson's got to go, I think, there's going to be more space for people like Tongue to come in. We've got an opening pair. We've now got to find another pair of opening bowlers because we've just lost them.
Yeah. Well, you're quite right to pick me up on Wokes because I think yesterday it's probably fair to say he was really the key man. Obviously, Broad took the plaudits, and perhaps rightly so, but Wokes took the crucial wickets, didn't he?
Well, he did 2 things. He got the openers out. He got Warner caught behind, didn't he? And then Khawaja, LBW, with a beauty, I thought. And then he got, of course, he got Steve Smith out. Yes. And Steve Smith played, I thought, a tired stroke. He'd been there 2.5 hours working really hard. And suddenly, he seemed to me, I watched that, he'd half lost concentration. I don't know. It wasn't a Smith stroke. But this is the great beauty of the game of cricket. nothing can be guaranteed.
Yes. And there's a theory on Wokes that he doesn't bowl so well abroad. Do you think is that valid, or do you think he will develop into a useful player on different?
Well, I think having taken the 19 wickets he took here in this series, and he's now been on a winning side against Australia, which he's never been before. I think his confidence is so important. I think now he's going to be a different man when he next takes on Australia, particularly in Australia too. And I would think that he's going to get better. I mean, I think he's very good as it is, but I think he will get better. I think he's got such good control of everything. And I'm very, very impressed with him. And I was also very impressed with him as a batsman. I mean, we saw how good he was as a lower order or lower middle order player at Headingley. I mean, that lovely square drive off Stark to win the match was a beautiful stroke. No, I think he's got a big future to play, and I personally think that he's got all the talent to conquer anything he comes up against.
Well, Henry, I'm going to end by asking you to make an impossible prediction, because as discussed, it's a long way ahead, and there's lots of cricket. Both sides will play in between, and both sides will develop and change. And the Australians have this amazing habit of discovering outrageously great talents at very short notice. But do you think we will beat Australia in the next Ashes?
It's a very difficult question. I think the answer to that, I shall say yes on the basis of this. If Ben Stokes is fit enough to lead us, I think his inspiration in the dressing room, in the hotel, out on the field is enormous and really mustn't be underestimated. If Stokes is not there, I don't think we will win, no.
And perhaps he might be able to bowl a bit more.
Well, I believe there's talk about an operation and everything. He's in his 30s now, isn't he? 33, I think. Yes, I hope so, because he has the ability to get good batsmen out suddenly. And he comes on and gets them. Ian Botham had this a bit too, didn't he? And but Stokes, as a batsman, he's such a powerful factor too. I think he's an amazing cricketer. And when you think, and I say this in no way detrimentally, but when you think he got into a bit of trouble, didn't he, in the Embargo nightclub a few years ago, I retired in 2017. I mean, hasn't he matured beyond a belief into a very, very formidable figure and one of the great Test captains? I really think you can say that now.
Well, on that positive note, we will end it. But Henry, I would like to say finally, thank you so much for coming on Spectator TV. I know our viewers have been very grateful for your insights.
And
I've enjoyed it enormously. I mean, it's very kind of you to get an old roue like me out in front of the camera again. And I really loved it. Thank you very much for having me.
Absolute nonsense. We'd be lucky to have you. So thanks again, and see you perhaps for the next Test series.